Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel at War update. And as we're set to deliberate the latest developments here in Israel, throughout the region and beyond, with chief focus on diplomatic efforts vis-a-vis the situation in Lebanon, the United States, Russia, Iran, Israel, France, all are trying to bring an end to the war in Lebanon. All the while the situation continues to be dire, of course, vis-a-vis the Gaza Strip, particularly the hostages there, 101 of them remaining in Hamas captivity. But with all that, let's just stop for a second and remember that 406 days ago, on October 7th of last year, the Islamist Hamas and its terror affiliates in the Gaza Strip launched an onslaught on southern Israel, declaring war by perpetrating a massacre, murdering some 1,200 mostly civilians, wounding over 4,800 others, and kidnapping some 250 civilians, most of them elderly, men, women, children, and infants. And as I noted, 101 of them have now spent 406 days in Hamas captivity. The subsequent day, on October 8th of last year, Iran essentially joined the war when it green-lighted its proxy in Lebanon, Hezbollah, to launch cross-border attacks against Israel. Since then, Hezbollah has launched over 12,000 munitions towards Israeli territory, and not Hezbollah alone. Additional proxies from Syria to Iraq to Yemen, including Iran proper, have all launched direct attacks against the state of Israel. Let's now turn to across the pond, where we're joined by Brigadier General in Reserve Yaron Rosen, formerly the IDF Chief of Cyber Staff, an Israel Air Force commander, and a fighter pilot. It's good to see you, General. I'd like to immediately ask you about the diplomatic ploys that are being pushed forward. Of course, Israel wants an end to the war. It didn't start this war. It didn't want this war. Nevertheless, 91,000 civilians, of them 61,000 asked by the government to leave their homes along the borderline with Lebanon, and another additional several tens of thousands are still displaced within Israel, not trusting the current situation to be safe enough for them to return to their homes. So what needs to be done in order to reach that point? And can we reach a diplomatic formula that would outline a certain reality in which that would be made possible?
I think we can. It's always important to remember the context of, what's going on right now. In the next few months, we're still in what we called the twilight or legacy diplomacy, part of between the presidencies in the U.S. And we need to keep this in mind when everything is now reorganized based on the success of the IDF on changing or sort of really changing the context vis-a-vis Lebanon and Gaza. The military gains are very important in this beginning of real change in the Middle East. But having said that, because of twilight legacy diplomacy, there's a pressure which is that might be counterproductive to what's going on now, and Israel needs to make sure that any agreement that is built that restructures how Lebanon works in the next hopefully years and decades to come serves Israel's posture, defense, and also builds the necessary deterrence vis-a-vis the whole Middle East, and of course against the Iranian-led Middle East quagmire. We need to keep this in mind, because if we rush into another agreement that just doesn't work on the ground, and we've seen how Iran is now rushing into Lebanon and saying, yeah, of course, we accept 1701, but 1701 failed for a real reason. So we cannot go back to 1701. We need to go into 1702 or whatever name you want to call it, basically based on southern DMZ, that will be a real example of for the price of war. If a nation allows the price of war for terrorists to wage war against Israel, this is what happens. And of course, the direct line of sight to Israeli villages and towns, that should be the stark reminder to Lebanese of the cost of waging war and a message to the whole region. So it has to start with that. And from then on, there are many, many other issues which we can expand on later. But the most important thing is, it is important to go into an agreement because time is of essence for all sides, including for Israelis, the reservists, the internal pressure on the economy. But on the other side, don't rush too fast. Make it a viable agreement.
Not only internal pressure on the economy, let's not forget that many of those children in northern Israel are not going to schools because of the current situation. Kindergartens are being disrupted on a regular basis. Just the other day, earlier this week, we had an unmanned aerial vehicle launched by Hezbollah, this Iranian proxy, that deliberately struck a kindergarten for children with Down syndrome, and it was a miracle that the kindergarten teacher was able to gather the children, bring them with her into the protective room in time in order to avoid a catastrophe. So something needs to be done in order to ensure that this comes to an end, but strategic interests, security interests must be preserved, and Israel must have the upper hand in this situation. That, as you noted, we can't just go back to 1701 without ensuring that something is enforced, because Hezbollah will continue to seek to strike Israel at any moment that it believes would grant it the advantage. But let's now turn to elsewhere in North Israel, where we're joined by Brigadier General in Reserve Relik Shafir, formerly an Israel Air Force commander and a fighter pilot as well, among a long list of other positions. It's good to see you, General. At the start of the war, when the Israeli Air Force started mowing the various terror infrastructure that Hezbollah had been building in Lebanon for years, you noted that the Air Force can degrade Hezbollah to a point of no return. Is this something that we are inching towards, or where are we in this process, since we're seeing an increase, an intensification of aerial sorties against Hezbollah targets, not only in Lebanon, but also in Syria?
I doubt very much whether there's really a point of no return, but degrading to the point where they are not acting with any strategic effect, and they're being pressed by the Lebanese majority, which are Sunnis and Christians, and they have a leverage over Hezbollah because their strength was degraded, is a good point that may last for a long time. So the pressure applied at this time, which includes more and more targeting of Hezbollah and Iranian personnel and munition depots in Syria, on the Syrian-Lebanese border, and in Baalbek, which is the Shia stronghold, as well as in Beirut itself. If one notices some of the targets through yesterday were very close to the airport in Beirut, so that the pressure is mounting. The number of Hezbollah leaders is diminishing, and the pressure is such that even Iran, so it seems, is hasting to reach the 1701 before Trump goes into his term, as they don't know that it's not that they know what will happen. There's a big void of what may happen in January, so everybody's vying for position. and it seems that they're in a hurry to get to 1701. They will have to contend with the fact that part of this is Israel's free hand at enforcing 1701, meaning that if anybody crosses, if Hezbollah crosses the Litani River or the agreed zone, Israel will have a free hand at attacking them either from there or from the ground. So this is we're in vital weeks leading up to the agreement itself. It'll take time, and both sides, according to Kissinger's legacy, are firing all they have in order to come with their hand, a strong hand, to the table.
Which is, of course, the major point of contention, Israel's freedom of operations to enforce any outline or any arrangement that may culminate with Hezbollah, of course, rejecting this outright and saying that it will not abide by any fringes or any arrangements that may go beyond the scope of 1701. But let's turn now to Central Israel, where we're joined by Brigadier General in Reserve Doron Gavish, the commander of the Israeli Air Force Task Force for Air and Missile Defense. It's good to see you, General. And with that, I also would like to take this opportunity to wish you a happy birthday with a big number. I'm not going to say the number. You can say if you like, but we do deeply appreciate you, and you know that you have many fans here on the show. But diving deep into the last 24 hours, the last week, if I may, many of the projectiles launched from Lebanese territory towards Israel came from areas where the IDF already entered into those villages and then subsequently pulled out with, unfortunately, large salvos of munitions, be they unmanned aerial vehicles, as well as rockets and different types of rockets that were utilized. What needs to be done in order to confront those challenges? Is the current scope of the ground maneuver, which is defined as limited within the constraints imposed on Israel by the Biden administration, not enough in order to reach a certain reality on the ground in the immediate vicinity of the border with Israel to frustrate Hezbollah's capabilities of launching additional attacks?
Well, Jonathan, first of all, thank you very much. It is always, you want to be among friends when you're celebrating your birthday. So I feel among friends and also our viewers. So thank you very much for that. Going back to our issue, I think that it is really important to highlight that the war is still there. Although there are talks about what would be the next step, and there are talks about maybe all kind of agreements, the war is still there. We see it also in the Gaza Strip, mainly in the area of Jabalia. But there is a fight here and there, very rarely, but we still see some rockets that are being shot from those areas toward Israel, and same for in the north. We see some rockets, as you said, but you know what, maybe it is important also to highlight that in the last few weeks, we see more and more UAVs that are being shot toward Israel, and the number is even growing in the last few weeks, and not only from Lebanon. We see some of them that are being shot from Syria, from Iraq, and even from Yemen. We have to remember that this week there were two ballistic missiles two ballistic missiles that were shot toward Israel that were intercepted from Yemen. So we are there in the war. With regard to your question, I think that still, although some of it are being shot from areas that we are in, there is never 100%, although you are in some area in control. But most of them are being shot toward Israel from areas which are far away from the first or second line of villages, as we call it. So the challenge is still there, although the Hezbollah is being strongly hit. by the way, also on this, we have to say that the Israeli Air Force is striking Hezbollah targets in Beirut very strongly, continuously degrading the Hezbollah's capabilities. But again, they are still trying to challenge our defenses with the UAVs and the rockets. So I think that in general we could say that we are in a point that we could still or we should think about what would be the next step. Are we going to get any agreement and so on? But there is still a way to go from the military point of view, and I think those two lines are going in parallel, and this is what we see from the Israeli side for sure. As I mentioned, the second line of villages that now are being taken care of, the Dahya and other Hezbollah infrastructures in Lebanon that are being struck. So this is from the one hand, and from the second hand, of course, there are discussion what would be the next step and what kind of agreement we could have in Lebanon. And here I fully agree with my colleague General Rosen. I think that we cannot stay on the 1701 as it is. We have to be, in a way, we have to find an agreement that it's much more relevant to the situation that we are in.
Indeed. Well, the senior advisor of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, namely Ali Larijani, he visited Damascus initially. After that, he traveled to Beirut for talks with the Speaker of Parliament and the leader of the Amal movement, the Shiite movement, Nabi Berri, to make sure that Iran's interests are preserved within those various discussions. It's important to explain to our viewers that when it comes to Syria, Russia is a rival of Iran about who will gain the full control in Syria ultimately, and therefore they're not necessarily always on the same page. And that's one point that I think I'd like to hear more from you, General Rosen. Are the Iranians trying to outmaneuver their Russian counterparts in this context, or is there some sort of alignment at this point in time? Because this has to do, of course, with Israel, the chief or arch enemy of the Islamic Republic of Iran, and the United States, the chief rival of Russia.
I think Iran is really concerned about their investment in Lebanon. This tentacle has been hit hardly, and internally, politically in Lebanon, the Shiites are in real turmoil with the Druze, the mountain people as they call them, and the Christians. And you can see from intelligence and open source intelligence that's out there how Lebanon internally is struggling through this war internally. Nothing to do, well, it is because of the Israeli success, but it is much more complicated now for Hezbollah with its Lebanese head than with the Iranian head. So this double-headed creature, Hezbollah, is now in its highest tension between its role as the destructor of Lebanon instead of protector of Lebanon, and its with its master, the Iranian. And the Iranians came over to say, hey, I just want to remind you who put you here in power, etc., etc. So this is the context of Larijani coming to Lebanon, to Syria and Lebanon. Both of them are arms, tentacles of the Iranian Middle Eastern nightmare. With the Russians, I think it's less a contest. I think the Iranians are not eluding themselves that they can somehow compete on the Russian control over the Syrian beachhead through the Latakia, Tartus area. That is centuries old, and the Russians are not going anywhere. What's important here is that everything that happens now with the restructuring of Lebanon, both internally, politically, and vis-a-vis Israel, through the agreement that will come sometime, hopefully, will sort of level and counter the Russian presence in the region with strong U.S. involvement in Lebanon as well, to show and to counter Russia on the northern side and Iran's influence from the east. That is where the U.S. has to position itself. Russia cannot guarantee anything. I'm hearing some discussions about Russia being the guarantee to something in Lebanon. That is a huge mistake on the part of the U.S. to allow that.
Absolutely.
And it will really do bad for the war in Ukraine, because the Russians want to be involved and sort of give something, because they want Russian companies that are operating in Syria to get off the embargo list. There are so many interests here, and we need to not, we really don't want to make mistakes here and let the Russians get into any kind of influence in Lebanon.
The Caesar Act is vital for Syria, and that is something that I cannot stress enough. General Relik Shafir, I'd like to ask you, there are reports that were made public by a journalist, Israeli journalist for that matter, Barak Ravid, on the latest Israeli strike on October 26th against Iran, in which apparently the Palchin nuclear facility, or a specific military site next to the nuclear facilities there, was targeted, in which a secret nuclear testing was being conducted, research specifically, something that the Iranians apparently tried to suppress, not to fall victim to its own claims of not pursuing nuclear weapon capabilities.
We don't know if this is true or not, but let's examine the possibility that it is true. As we, understand, all of us, Israel cannot destroy the Iranian nuclear project as it is. It's distributed into over 30 sites, and most of it is under a deep cover of rock and cement. So it would take a strategic force such as the U.S. Air Force in order to deliver the kind of munition that can take apart the system the way it is constructed now. But an area that takes that actually empowers the ability to run tests would stop the Iranian mission of completing a delivered warhead through rockets. Remember that a nuclear facility or a nuclear bomb can be delivered in other means, but through rockets it would take a very difficult and long trial through firing in the air. Remember that a missile goes from launch within about 30 seconds through about 80 degrees, from plus 30 Celsius to about minus 56 within a few seconds. And the whole contraption within the missile has to withstand high pressure G and changes in temperature, and that takes a lot of testing. And if the test site has been taken out, then it delays the ability to produce a projectile for a long time, maybe a few years. So this would be the rationale behind such an attack if it did take such a targeting, if it did take place. And I think logic leads to the fact that you cut the chain that leads to an operational system by its weakest link, which is getting the system into a projectile through a rocket. So I think this is a way to look at this particular report.
Thank you, General Shafir. General Gavish, unfortunately, we ran out of time, but I'd like to give you 45 seconds. The RGC top commander, Hassan Salami, as well as the commander of the Iranian armed forces, made very deliberate threats towards Israel, pledging that the attack will happen irrespective of any statements by Iran government officials. Israel is obviously preparing more than it's already prepared to confront such a threat. What should we keep in mind? We receive a lot of questions about this from our viewers. Are we preparing to confront such a threat in the days ahead?
Well, first of all, thank you to my two colleagues for my birthday present, the 54 seconds. The other thing is that, yes, the answer is yes, Jonathan. We are fully prepared to it, not only on the defense, also in the offense. And Israel stated that if Iran will strike against or attack against Israel, the next strike would be even more painful. And this is on the offensive line. On the defensive line, Israel is fully prepared to it. We have to remember that more assets came into the region recently, U.S. assets. We're talking about the THAAD battery. We're talking about more ships that are also enhancing the ballistic missile defense in this region. So I think that we could say that we are fully prepared. They failed in the last 2 times. They will fail again. And it would be a misjudgment by them if they would decide to attack Israel. But this is for them to make the decisions. We are ready in the offense and in the defense.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, General Gavish. Again, happy birthday, General Shafir and General Rosen.
Thank you.
And I'd like to immediately also thank all of you at home as well, and with wishes from here in Jerusalem. Shabbat Shalom.